Right, so since the fall of Syria to Israel's erstwhile allies / convenient patsies HTS, and the result of that being Lebanon and therefore Hezbollah ostensibly being cut off from the so-called axis of resistance of Iran, and with a response from Iran still expected following a third attack on them by Israel last October, though the more time that passes the less likely that seems, much of the Western media narrative has been of Iran now being a spent force, now cut off from Hezbollah and Hamas, now reliant on their alliance with the Houthis in Yemen and Islamic Resistance in Iraq. Their capabilities neutered somewhat. That's what the narrative's been. But this speaks more of a misplaced Western optimism than any sense of reality. That said, though, if Iran are to be of relevance in the Middle East going forwards, they can't afford to sit on their laurels about it either. Their economy continues to become ever weaker and more fragile, and war is probably inevitable. The desire for Iran to be overthrown by the US has been nailed on for years, and the weaker they get now, the more softened up they are for a final push against them. So whatever Iran have planned, time is of the essence. But they do have a plan, a military plan, and if they finally enact it, not only is Israel probably finished, but Iran's survival may actually depend on it. It's go big soon or go home and just wait for their inevitable demise. Right, so Iran have a plan of action, do they, Damo? Well, yes, they seem to. Indeed they do. That's just what's being said anyway. It's something that has been discussed on and off over the last several months, in fact, in various foreign media. A hypothetical plan that has become more and more of a do-or-die plan since the fall of Syria particularly, with the Al-Qaeda and Islamic State cast-offs of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, and their leader, now the de facto president of Syria, though without an election anytime soon, he's little more than a pro-Zionist petty dictator at this point, a head chopper in a suit trying to bond with Netanyahu's genocidal apartheid state, and in that vein is very forthcoming about how much disdain he has for the likes of Iran, though his ire is finally and increasingly being vented over Israel as well, refusing to be his best friend on one hand and consistently taking more and more Syrian territory on the other. This plan of Iran's, though, which you may have heard mention of, is called Operation True Promise 3. True Promise being a Muslim concept referring to their version of Judgment Day, when the final judgment of humanity will be carried out by Allah. It is called the True Promise because Allah guaranteed it would happen, and so the Iranians have called this plan, and the two that came before it, the same thing, because they've also guaranteed that it will happen. But what exactly is Operation True Promise 3 then, therefore? Fundamentally, it is Iran declaring war on Israel at its most simplest, but it is more than that, because it is Iran taking on the US as well, and ultimately that is always going to be the bigger issue for Iran if there is to be any long-term peace and a return to some kind of stability in the Middle East. You see, for years, and for a lot of people, they still believe this is the main reason for US interests in the Middle East, is centered around oil, the acquisition of oil fields by the US, access to oil markets. But if you think about it, they already have access to the vast majority of that now. Following the wars in Iraq, they gained access to their oil. The US, along with the Kurds, already control much of the oil fields in Syria. They trade readily with Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern states. Aside from Iran itself, the US isn't short of access to oil these days in the Middle East. So why are they spending so much time, therefore, so much effort, so much resources, not to mention billions upon billions of dollars, in the Middle East still? And ultimately, their reason for doing this boils down to Israel now. It is protecting their proxy, their strategic military asset in the Middle East, their ally. And it doesn't matter what Israel does or says, the support is unquestioning. It's why Genocide Joe, despite having reputedly called Netanyahu a very bad guy, is still hell-bent on sending billions more to Israel before he's dumped out of power. And why Donald Trump will very much continue to do likewise. So for Iran to move against Israel, to take Israel out, removes their real foe from the chessboard, so to speak, which is the US. Israel in and of itself is rather weak. Without the US, it is nothing. We more and more become readily aware of this as a simple fact, really. Its economy is now on its knees. It has been described historically as being weaker than a spider's web. The words of the assassinated Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, in case you wondered who said that. But for the US, Iran represents everything they absolutely do not want people across the world to see. For all the justifiable issues surrounding human rights, the fact the theocratic nation came into being off the back of a coup, The fact that it has, despite that, stood the test of time and has existed and persisted in that form since 1979 does speak to the capability of a self-sufficient and independent Muslim state. So much so they have become the main sponsors of the Axis of Resistance, are seen as the head of this movement, which includes the Houthis, Islamic Resistance in Iraq, Hamas, Hezbollah, and of course formerly Syria played a role in that too. But that is now gone, separating Axis members from one another, as that has, because Syria was central to this. And this has led to a belief and a narrative that Iran have suffered a devastating blow and will struggle to ever return from that. Now, I mentioned earlier in my intro that we were still awaiting a third retaliation from Iran for that strike in late October by Israel. This is exactly what Operation True Promise 3 is. The previous two retaliations for Israeli attacks back in July and early October of last year, very much being Operation True Promise 1 and True Promise 2. You were wondering what they were. But this time it is different. And this is a message that was conveyed last November by Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, which has been detailed in the Iran Press News Agency from that time. An excerpt of that reading. In response to a question about the timing of the Operation True Promise 3, Abbas Araghchi told commanders and staff at the IRGC command headquarters, "This is something you should answer." He added, "The Operation True Promise 2, like the Operation True Promise 1, was a defensive measure, meaning it was a response to an attack. However, we have informed the international community that the aggressive assault by the Zionist regime on Iranian soil is a new invasion, and we will certainly respond at the appropriate time. We will not forfeit our right to retaliate." Araghchi said, "As you know, decisions regarding this matter are made elsewhere. However, I can say that over the past 12 months, we have acted with particular intelligence and prudence. Our decisions have not been impulsive or emotional, and we have responded at the appropriate time, taking into account all conditions, probabilities, and enemy conspiracies." An awkward truth, but yeah, Iran has a right to defend itself too, and its right to retaliate is still there hanging in the air. Note the line there about the first two operations being defensive measures, implying this third attack won't be, since they considered it now a new invasion by Israel. That said, however, since November we've seen the fall of the Assad regime, of course, haven't we? And this means if Iran are to keep their true promise for the third time, the window of opportunity is closing for them. The reason for that is that Iran's economy is tanking too, and has been for quite a while. Where the government there blame US sanctions for that have decimated the value of the Iranian rial, for instance, and inflation in Iran sits at 33%. There is rampant poverty, there are gas and power shortages, regular outages, pollution makes the air almost unbreathable out there, and rents are getting hiked by 50% on a year-by-year basis. Where Iran continues to make technological advances, though, the government has not invested in infrastructure which would ease the economic burden on families. And when roughly a third of the population are all employed by the state, economic health or growth, however you prefer to look at that, is not good with the ratio being like that. But if the first two True Promise operations were defensive measures, then True Promise 3 cannot be about simply attacking Israel again and then expecting things to be different this time around, and then not attack back for a fourth time. If this is about stabilising the Middle East, bringing peace for the long term, then its aims have to be about bringing the US to the negotiating table. Now, Iran have tried to do this before. To get the US to negotiate with them, they put their nuclear research capabilities on the table to the Bush administration in 2003, as a for instance, and they got ignored roundly. So unfortunately, it seems like a show of force is going to be the only way to get US attention here, and deploying that against Israel, who they still have a right of retaliation against in the name of self-defense, sovereign nation, as Iran is. But it hurts me to write this because violence is never the answer. It should never be the answer, and it won't be the final answer this time either. But sadly, the US don't seem interested in negotiating with Iran unless they get forced into it. And so at this point in time, at this juncture, what alternative to that could there be? Because I really wish I could see another one. Reinforcing that, though, is what happened in Syria. A big blow to Iran, as that was. It was great news for Iran's enemies, Israel, the US, and they have become more emboldened with both Netanyahu and mouthpieces in Washington, notably Donald Trump's biggest Zionist backer of them all, the billionaire Miriam Adelson, now agitating for war with Iran. Adelson's late husband once suggested that the US should just drop a nuke on Iran and solve the problem that way. Charming pair. So with a closing window and a retaliation on par with the last two True Promise operations not really cutting the mustard if they go for that again this time, if Iran is to effect lasting change anyway and get the US talking to them, what will it take? The military scale must match the political objectives, as someone famous once said, I'm sure. Striking civilian areas, as Iran has gone to lengths to avoid previously, only striking military targets can't be the answer either, because that's what Israel always do. And if the political objective is to burst their bubble and open the eyes of other people around the world, they need to not stoop to their level, but they do need to shake up their game. One claim that has persisted is that Iran have not shown their full hand where their military capabilities are concerned. In previous strikes, it's been argued they let much of their ordnance be shot down by Israel's air defences as well. So if they were to demonstrate that that was the case, and that Israeli air defences, not least the US THAAD system they've deployed, are actually completely futile against a more beefed up Iranian response, that will go a long way to opening up the eyes of the world. Targeting infrastructure like power stations and refineries, especially in key areas like Tel Aviv, would also rattle cages as long as it doesn't take lives when they do it. But that's the rub with war. What do you think, though? Will Iran respond? Will they keep their true promise? Will it be different this time? Will they stoop to Israel's level, or do you think they're better than that? Do let me know your thoughts on this in the comments below. Meanwhile, where the new Syrian regime is certainly no friend of Iran, they are increasingly becoming fed up with Israel snatching more and more Syrian territory, now having taken an area almost twice the size of Gaza, it's emerged today. So HTS have now gone to Donald Trump to try and get him to tell Israel to get out of Syria. Good luck with that. What makes you think he cares about you? I wonder if HTS will realise before much longer they are surplus to requirements at this point. Check out the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please also do hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already to help support the channel, and make sure you don't miss out on new daily content. And I will hopefully catch you on the next video. Cheers, folks.